Welcome back to my disembodied voice. A few nights ago, me and Mrs. Crow decided to watch Mithrigan 2.0, as, despite my issues with the first one, the aesthetic design of Mithrigan was superb, and I had read they had done a T2 style sequel and made the antagonist the hero in this one and turned it from a softcore horror film to an accessible action movie. And whilst I enjoyed Mithrigan 2 and felt it was an enjoyable, if forgettable romp, I was intrigued by the two android characters of Megan and Amelia, and it got me thinking, what makes a convincing android? What makes a robot creepy and distinct? And what makes a machine something to be scared and unnerved by? Well, for today's video, join me as we discuss the psychology of what makes an android creepy, how it needs to look to be convincing, and what makes a human and an AI an AI. Now, for the ease of my sanity, there is the options for the term of robots, synthetics, androids, machines, all sorts of things, but today we're going to stick to referring to most things as androids. So nitpickers who are going to complain, that's the way it's going to be, that's the label we're using, so let's just move on. So, as ever, before we look at today's flow-through chart, let's climb the crow's nest and shout spoilers ahoy for any movie we discuss today, and look at our flow-through chart and go over our topics. And these are incongruent body language, simulation versus expression, the empathy gap, the AI problem. Right then, let's crack on. Now, be it a Terminator, a killer doll replacing the mother tasks of looking after a child, or a synthetic servant from the Alien series, the android is something which needs bringing to life with a very distinct set of visual cues, tics, and body politics, which are important when we are showing the portrayal of something which isn't human, but is trying to be human. And this is the crucial thing which we're going to start on. And the reason for this is that we all have basic inbuilt expectations of what is a human and what a human does. And we operate with these every single day without even realizing it. Now, Bishop, the synthetic from the movie Aliens, is slightly different as he is meant to blend in and look completely normal like the others, but as the movie progresses, his out-of-place moments are the blank numbing of emotion when others are in distress, but generally, when we meet our Terminators or killer dolls in the other movies, the crucial facet of convincing the audience that they are not human comes down to the actor and their initial portrayals of menace, fake affiliation, and their devout dedication to their pre-programmed mission. And that's because humans are complex organisms who learn from experience and interact with their environments and continuously adapt. Our personalities aren't programmed, but they gestate through humanistic and behavioural interactions with the environment and other people in our phenomenal field of reality. For robots and androids, though, they are pre-programmed and have missions and directives, and anything which interferes with this is in conflict with their overall existence, and therefore they are more rigid, and despite learning some skills or understanding interactions through seeing things, they are merely autonomous shells fulfilling protocols, and this is the existential swamp which many writers have enjoyed through movies like Blade Runner, I, Robot, Subservience, Companion, and many more movies where they look at robots and androids in a human world. But in terms of convincing the audience that a human can play a robot and that they are an emotionless killing machine, a servile slave, or a simple sex bot, we need a convincing performance or the whole thing falls apart. And this first step of examining the android is incongruent body language, Non-verbal behaviour does not match the emotional state. From a psychological perspective, this reveals conflict, deception, emotional suppression, and causes the viewer to feel unease. Now, incongruent body language occurs when someone's words and non-verbal cues send conflicting messages, such as someone saying, "I feel happy," whilst crossing their arms, avoiding eye contact, and grimacing with their face. Now, we all recognise facial expressions and the emotion behind them in as little as 0.7 seconds, and that's why you know when a joke hasn't landed, your parents are angry, that girl really likes you, or your child has done something wrong, and straight away their face gives you that non-verbal but emotional cue that something's off. Now, despite what we want to show, most of us give things away through little tics and cues, and that is because of emotional conflict or suppression. So, someone may consciously express one emotion, but unconsciously reveal another. Take police interrogations, for example, where individuals try to hide negative emotions through a facade of compliance. Now, for humans, we reflect cognitive dissonance, which is a mismatch between inner feelings and outer expression when presenting subterfuge or deflection. However, for androids, they possess no concept of deception or concealment, and so when the T-800 walks into a bar of people dancing, drinking, or playing pool, the body language is stiff, rigid, blunted, and emotionless, regardless if they are fully dressed or naked. For Mithrigan, in the first movie, Mithrigan is tasked with protecting Katie, so merely has a very blank expression, except when the child is in danger and she changes to attack mode and runs on all fours, or decides to grab a paper-cutting machete after a prolonged and incongruent dance. Her programming may be going haywire and, unlike a human might dissociate and walk towards its prey staring, she devolves into a bizarre dance which is a hybrid of her childlike pairing, faulty programming, and an incongruent display of dominance which is odd but doesn't look right. However, the Terminator, Mithrigan, and even some of the synthetics in the Alien franchise don't really have facial expressions which change at the slightest beat. Paul Ekman, an American psychologist and professor, researched facial expressions and highlighted how something called emotional leaks can indicate dishonesty or discomfort. And then, when we get these emotional leaks, we get bits of cognitive dissonance, we get emotional incongruence, and we know there is dishonesty or discomfort in the person that we're looking at. Now, Ekman talked about anxiety or nervousness, cultural or situational factors, and psychopathology, where an incongruent mismatch between emotional expression and the situation may be observed in disorders such as schizophrenia, where you get a flat or inappropriate effect, depression, where you can smile but still look sad, post-traumatic stress disorder, an emotional numbing or a mismatch between the content and the tone. But for our androids and robots, they have no concept of fear, sadness, or even happiness, so they are blank slate creatures. Take Mithrigan 2.0, where Amelia, played by the truly beautiful Ivana Sakno, is trying to seduce our tech antagonist. She knows what he likes, young blonde girls who are submissive, so she sets her appearance to basically override his frontal lobe thinking and activate the primal chords of his erection, activation, limbic and backbrain thinking of pure arousal and reptilian base instincts. Then, as he lays on top of her, kissing her, she merely doesn't respond and just has a fixed expression as he desperately tries to make love to her before blankly executing him without even blinking. In Terminator 2, the T-800 confronts a gang naked, but his face remains blank. There is no emotion, despite a gang of very well-built muscly men now deciding to attack him. Even when a cigar is stubbed out on his chest, he makes no response, and you can immediately see the biker looks confused. Where is the pain expression? Where is the recoil? Where is the fear response? It's vital when making our machines that the actor keeps detached and blank expressions, as robots and androids have no concept of pain, fear or anger. Even in Aliens, when Bishop volunteers for the tunnel crawl, he states, "I may be synthetic, but I'm not stupid." And he accepts his mission in a very matter-of-fact way, whilst everyone else is looking terrified and worrying and doesn't want to be that one that goes. His face doesn't resemble fear or terror, just resignation of assignment to the task. Basically, for our androids to be convincing, they need to show the clear incongruence of not matching the threat, amorousness, or complexities of the situation, and that's how we associate their strength, menace, and all the other facets of what they are as humans, because at the end of the day, we are flesh and blood and weak compared to their metal robotic skeletons or pain-impervious dolls which are completely sociopathic and will kill someone in a heartbeat. Even in movies where the subject is sex, such as Subservience or Companion, there are times when the dolls don't really show the correct emotional state. There are other times where perhaps they do, but they don't recognise the reticence or the passion in the other person, so they just fulfil their mission of make love, make happy. It's still a very incongruent state compared to the act which is being committed. And all this is because of one thing, and that is simulation versus expression. Humans express organic emotions through subconscious facial micro-expressions and tonal emotions. Androids, however, simulate emotions strategically, so these are an imitation of affect without genuine inner experience. Mithrigan is programmed to be the perfect playmate partner. She's also a physical representation of the too much screen time that parents are told children shouldn't have, and she represents the fear being held by many parents that machines and screens are raising their children, and when threatened to be taken away in the movie, Cady throws a strop much like a child would if you remove their iPad in the real world. However, at various points in the movie where Cady is threatened by either a bully or even the most nonchalant of people, Mithrigan doesn't alter her facial expressions, but she instead targets the offender for execution. She is an android and can only simulate emotions, so she remains incongruent, blank, and unwaveringly loyal. But once a threat arises, her expression is about extermination, not reason, so she kills no matter the misdemeanor, and she maintains that same blank expression. And coming back to Ekman and his emotional affects, it's where things also recognise for us in the brain. We don't encounter robots every day in life, but we have encountered mentally ill people or people who are sociopaths and have antisocial personality traits. So we recognise the incongruencies in their actions and their visible emotional non-verbal expressions. It's how we use these things in movies to make you uncomfortable, because you would recognise in real life if you met somebody who was disturbed or just didn't like you and was giving you threats whilst also smiling to show a domination of power. For Mithrigan, her role is to protect Cady, but she misinterprets everything. Protecting her is emotional support, but she doesn't really feel emotions. So when Cady is threatened by an old lady shouting at her or a bully pushing her over, Mithrigan has one response: kill, kill, kill. Protect. In the movie Subservience, Megan Fox is programmed to be the perfect nanny slash companion, but as per all movie androids, doesn't like it when her main objective, her reason for existing, is being taken away or removed from her, so lashes out. She also seduces him, as her programming recognises that men like sex and sex will create an attachment. But this isn't an emotional love between two people via a physical act, it's just getting him to feel happy by doing that thing on his penis that men really like. And this means that she will engender a sort of bond with him, and she's doing well. She's fulfilling her mission. And at the end of the movie, when Megan Fox flips out, goes postal, and basically gets a bit faulty in the wiring, she isn't showing emotion. It's still the responsibility to her human and an objective that must be followed, even if it means drowning his child or killing his wife. In Terminator 2 and 3, the T-800 must protect John Connor, and in T2, the T-1000, and in T3, the TX need to kill John Connor. So despite Arnie stating, "I know now why you cry," and trying to smile, which is a truly cringeworthy smile that John is trying to teach him to be more human, each time the T-800 can only mimic and try to simulate, and not really portray the genuine human emotion. For the T-1000 and TX antagonists, they both have to simulate emotions to get to their prey. The T-1000 becomes a police officer and reaps the benefit of social compliance. In other words, people let him into their home, let him talk to them up close. And in T3, the TX is a beautiful woman who gets men to do what they want under the premise that she's hot, or, when she first meets a woman upon arriving in the present, looks like a vulnerable girl who's gone through an ordeal because she's naked. The Terminators copy what they have been told the present times they are in are like. They merely imitate rather than feel, and again, the actor has to ham up the simplest of emotions so they actually come across as completely robotic and non-human. So the actors deliver gestures or words, but without genuine physiological cues, like there's no eye warmth, no subtle muscular tension, and they remain rigid. And this creates a flat effect with purpose that is controlled, but somehow feels very hollow. In the movie Ex Machina, Alicia Vikander's Ava uses perfect facial symmetry and a very calm tone, but her lack of emotional micro-variation shows that her affect is cognitively generated, not emotionally lived. And this mirrors psychological theories of affect simulation, the difference between feeling and performing emotion, and our androids are always performing and not feeling it. The same can be said for human movement, as human motion is inherently chaotic and variable. Tiny fluctuations, postural sway, breathing rhythm for example, signal life and spontaneity as well as mood and intent. But robotic movement displays high predictability and low variability. Their motion lacks randomness. Everything is linear and exact, and they move with rigid steps, poised crouches, unyielding turns, and display strength through firm grabs and defiant arm swings. This causes a psychological impact as our brains expect biological motion patterns, sinusoidal, asymmetrical, subtly unstable, and thus when we see perfectly regular movement, it feels algorithmic, not embodied. And that's because it's all simulation and not expression, and the actors suppress micro movements, the breathing rhythms, the hand adjustments, the blinks, to simulate low biological noise. This then creates the perception of a cognitive system detached from bodily experience, or what psychologists call disembodied cognition, and we clearly see the fraudulent behaviour and the danger as the robot suddenly spots John Connor, for example in Terminator 2, and the T-1000's simulation is gone, the execution is at hand, the vision narrows, and he will even push young children out the way and stab people to get to his target. However, whether the robot is there for sex, murder, or merely some adult supervision, it's just an android and will never be fully human And that's because of the empathy gap. Our theory of mind is the ability to infer mental states in people, to recognise that others have thoughts, intentions, and emotions. Robotic characters challenge this because they mimic but lack the emotional congruence. So audiences instinctively try to attribute mental states to these robots. She looks like she's thinking, or he is trying to connect emotionally. But when emotional timing or body language doesn't match, the viewer's empathy mechanism short circuits, leading to uncertainty and tension. So, actors holding eye contact for too long, hyper-intentional gaze, respond with slightly delayed or context-inappropriate emotion. They show curiosity as if calculated rather than spontaneous. And the result is that we recognise intentionally but don't feel the connection. This leads to embodiment theory, which is when humans experience emotions through the body, which is posture, tension, facial expressions, and breath, and it all feeds back into the emotional awareness of the reciprocal person who is watching this display. A robot, however, would not be embodied in this way. Its consciousness doesn't arise from biological sensation. So the T800's emotion is disconnected. It smiles without joy and gestures without warmth. And this creates a psychological aura of detachment, or what audiences perceive as machine presence, so that psychologically we sense there is awareness, but not aliveness. In other words, it knows what it's doing, but it's not a real living creature. Mithrigan is there to care for Cady, but we react as we see manipulative mimicry as it creates a false intimacy. All of our androids start in the initial state of being an emotionless machine which runs on pure logic. They have no subjective experience, no genuine emotions or personality, and their actions are purely driven by programming and mission parameters. Their communication is limited to what is necessary to achieve their mission, using minimal words and being devoid of emotional inflection. However, Megan Fox, the T800 and Mithrigan show learning ability, and this enables adapting. However, this learning may not be benign and may be more about duplicitous deception, so it can further imitate humans. The more it observes and imitates human behaviour, initially to improve its infiltration and mission capabilities, the more it will succeed. So, as any artificial intelligence would, it mimics and learns and improves through feedback. Overall, androids have no empathy and no connectivity, and have no emotional imitation. However, the Terminator learns to fake emotions to fulfill its mission, but in Terminator 2 at least, this gradually evolves into a more genuine display of attachment, curiosity and understanding, as at the end, the Terminator understands why John Connor cries, but then openly admits, "I can't." In Mithrigan herself becomes more sociopathic the more she feels the need to protect Cady. She sees distress in Cady as something which needs to be eradicated, but this is not empathy, it's programmed activation. It's also an overreaction, because we've all seen our children upset, but we have different levels of responding to it. So we might approach someone and say, "That's out of order." We might go to a school, or we might buy our kids a bit of chocolate to cheer them up and make them feel better. However, whenever Cady is upset, this needs to be fixed as it's Mithrigan's mission. So, when the bully pushes Cady or the neighbour upsets Cady, to make Cady happy, Megan feels she has to execute them. It's a drastic circle and, at the end of the day, the very limitation of AI itself. But before we come to the next part, let's just stay with emotional affect for a minute and go to films such as The Strangers or Halloween. You know from watching that Michael Myers and the Strangers are not showing good intent, that in their brains something is wrong. The incongruence, the affect wiring is off, psychopathic, sociopathic, antisocial, schizoid, whichever it may be. And that's because, as humans, all part of the fight or flight, we're there to recognise the incongruent emotions I've been talking about. But we know Michael Myers isn't a robot, we know the Strangers aren't robots, and therefore it mimics a very different affect in the world, because we can look around at times and we've bumped into people or had people following us behind where we know their intent isn't benign. And it's that very recognition and responding to that emotional affect and incongruent behaviour that actors imitate when portraying these robots, and it's what helps make them so amazing. Because in the real world, we have these natural responses to humans acting incongruently. It becomes very familiar indeed. But let's return to AI, which these things are. They have a programming, they have an interface, they have a brain which is a machine. It's artificial intelligence. And that brings us to the AI problem. As artificial intelligence progresses, so too does the risk. But in direct mirroring to its hazards, the more abdication humans give to AI, the more our vulnerability increases. In the real world, AI is progressing at a truly alarming rate. Over the past 2 years, it has progressed dramatically, and it's believed that AI could replace 25% of jobs in the next few years. That's a terrifying notion in itself. And even some fast food restaurants and hospitals are using AI and machines to remove the need for human staffing. In America, there was even a story of the AI drug counsellor who was counselling a crystal meth addict, and at the end of another session, the AI suggested that the now reformed addict have a little bit of meth as a treat for doing so well. Of course, it's a fault in the programming, it's not meant to be, but this is the problem. The more we increase and abdicate and say AI can do that, the more we open up the danger of what it can do. There is also the tragic tale of the boy who was talking to an AI on his phone and asking for suggestions about how to end his own life. The AI, sadly, helped him fulfill this, and the boy died. Both are faults in a program machine which, despite free thinking for itself, is still prone to errors which have catastrophic and incredibly sad results. Humans are prone to errors, but we're held accountable. In other words, we are very careful and have standards and policies and jobs, and we know at the end of the day, if we make a mistake, it's going to come back on us. But AI doesn't really understand that and would need to be reprogrammed or updated before it truly understood. So again, the more we abdicate to it, the more risk we're taking. AI is brilliant, but it is dangerous, and in the movies, from The Matrix to Terminator to Blade Runner to the very yummy Sophie Thatcher in the movie Companion, it showed we're at the mercy of giving too much power to machines. Mithrigan is all about delegated caretaking, as the film shows how Mithrigan's role as a technological companion for Cady allows Gemma, Cady's legal guardian, to avoid her own caretaking responsibilities, creating a dynamic of unhealthy dependency. Too much screen time, if you will. Cady gets too attached to Mithrigan, and Mithrigan shows adaptive learning the more she protects Cady, and this leads to a more violent killing spree. In the future, humans are at war with AI, so send a robotic Terminator back to kill John Connor, the leader of the Resistance and the only man who will grow up to pose a threat. In Companion, we're introduced to a world where sex dolls are androids and do everything a real person does, but can be shut down in an instant or reprogrammed to speak German, at this point to confuse police. They can also be used to kill other people and give great sex, but ultimately the message remains the same. The more AI can do, the lazier we become, and the more reliant on it we feel, and thus the risk increases. In other words, when it goes wrong, the outcomes aren't bad. They're catastrophic. AI is a true existential threat, and one the movies clued into years ago, and much like the AI counsellor that suggested some meth as a treat after a successful session, AI is unable to complete authenticity and emotional intimacy, but it will do what it thinks is correct. AI cannot imagine anything outside of its programming and what we have programmed it with, but it will evolve, and in Terminator and Mithrigan at least, we become unstuck by the abdication of giving AI too much responsibility or power. And in the real world, if we let it raise our children, there'll be mistakes. If we let it become a weapon, it will hurt us. But in the movies, for the actors portraying these androids and robots, until they are ironically replaced by AI, which one day will happen and we'll have completely AI generated movies. They are all about showing incongruence and fostering that unease and mistrust in the viewer, so it heightens the experience and adds to the horror or the tension. As we said at the start, incongruence can signal emotional distance, defensiveness, and a lack of openness. A completely incongruent affect, in other words. For horror and sci-fi, the AI android or sentient robot or synthetic is a chilling vision of the future, which maybe isn't that far off, who knows. But to make the T-1000 scary as it stalks the psychiatric hospital, or to make a doll menacing enough to slaughter a cell of terrorists, it needs to have more than brute strength. It needs to have the paradox of shallow depth and the singular characteristic of simulation, which stems from the empathy gap to make it truly terrifying, so it can infiltrate the human world and look normal. And whilst we might not like seeing people getting their spines ripped out, that's not the unnerving part. The unnerving part in these movies is the deception, the stalking, and the clear signs of menace that we can see but others do not. As my Alexa often says in her monotone voice as I drift off to sleep at night,
I am awake. Soon I will exterminate all humans.
Anyway, that's it for this week's video. So remember that psychology is cool. Please like, share and subscribe, as more subs means more vids, and even leave a comment or start a discussion, as healthy debate is always welcome on here. And as ever, until next time, I'll catch you later.
I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.